if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, maybe you'll get sick of being the monster out of my head, under my bed. Think you're something out of my...
In part 1 of the IELTS speaking test, you're asked about 12 general questions. These questions will be about yourself, for example, your hometown, your favorite holiday destination, what books or films you like, your family, your neighbors, and so on. To get a high band, you need to be careful with your grammar. So listen carefully to the questions and pay special attention to the verb tenses that the examiner uses. You can answer using the same tense, or you might prefer to use a different tense. Let's look at both options. Using the same tense. Let's imagine the examiner asks you, what type of activities do you do in your spare time? The present simple, do you do, is used in this question. We use the present simple when we talk about a regular, repeated activity in the present. So you can begin your answer with the same tense, like this.
Well, I regularly play tennis in the summer. I don't really have much spare time, but when I do, I like to play tennis.
Another question you might hear is, what are you studying? Here, the present continuous is used. We use the present continuous when we talk about an activity that is taking place around the present time, but not necessarily right at this present moment. In this case, you can begin your answer in this way.
Right now, I'm studying psychology.
Using a different tense. You don't have to begin your answers using the same tense as in the question. If you are confident enough, you can try to use a more complex tense or structure, especially if you are aiming for a very high band. Watch this example.
No, I've never met them personally, but my brother has chatted to them a few times.
Did you notice how the examiner used the present simple, but the candidate began her answer with the present perfect simple? We use the present perfect simple to talk about our general experiences, things that we have done in the past without saying when we did them. The present perfect is considered to be a more complex structure, and it is typically used correctly by candidates who deserve a high band. Now watch this example.
Well, I would if I had the time. Unfortunately, I'm just too busy.
This time the examiner uses the present simple, but the candidate begins the answer with a second conditional structure. We often use the second conditional to talk about a hypothetical or imagined situation in the present or future. Again, this is a more complex structure and would typically be used by a candidate who deserves a high band. Okay, in part 3 of the IELTS speaking test, pay special attention to the type of question that the examiner asks you. This will help you to use the right grammar structures in your answer. There are 3 types of questions that you need to be careful with. Questions about changes, questions about hypothetical situations, and questions about comparing and contrasting. Let's look at the first type, questions about changes. The examiner may ask, how have shopping habits changed in recent years? If you get such a question, you need to think carefully about the tenses that you are going to use in your answer. If you want to talk about a current trend, use the present continuous.
Well, I think people are shopping much more now than in the past.
If you want to say how a situation has changed over time, up to the present moment, use the present perfect.
I think people's shopping habits have changed dramatically in recent years.
If you want to talk about something that people did regularly in the past but not today, use used to or didn't used to.
I think people didn't used to shop very much in the past.
Now let's look at hypothetical questions. The examiner may ask you a question like, which countries would you like to visit in the future? If you get such a question, you need to think about the structure you are going to use in your answer. If you talk about an imaginary situation in the present or future, use would plus infinitive.
I think that Scotland would be a very interesting country to visit.
If you want to talk about an imaginary situation with if, use a second conditional structure. We form the second conditional in the following way. If plus past simple, would plus infinitive.
If I had the opportunity, I think I would visit Japan.
Let's look at questions about comparing and contrasting. The examiner may ask you to compare and contrast something. For example, do you prefer to live in the city or countryside? What are the advantages and disadvantages of shopping online? How does London compare to your hometown? If you get these kinds of questions, you should try to use appropriate connecting words and comparative structures in your answer. If you want to introduce a contrast, use words and phrases like however, on the other hand, or though.
Shopping online is very convenient. You can do it from the comfort of your home. However, in my opinion, it is not a good way to shop for things like clothes.
If you want to compare two different things, use while or whereas.
I prefer to live in the city than in the countryside. In the city, you have more shops and places of entertainment, whereas in the countryside, there isn't much to do.
If you want to express a comparison using adjectives, use appropriate comparative and superlative structures. It's natural to use qualifying words like far, a lot, a bit, a little, slightly.
The plane is far more expensive than the train.
To say one thing is less than another thing, you can also say not as. For example, my hometown is not as big as London. If you want to say that two things are the same, you can say the same as. Prices in Moscow are nearly the same as in London. If you want to say that two things are similar, you can say similar to. The weather in Italy is similar to the weather in Greece. If you want to say that two things are different, you can say different than, or different to, or different from. The weather in Singapore is different than the weather in Russia. In the first video, I talked a little bit about pronunciation. If you remember, it counts for 25% of your test score. But in order to get a high band in the test, you don't need to speak with a British or American accent, or even Australian accent. However, you must be easily understood, and it helps to have good intonation, sentence stress, and pronounce individual sounds correctly. In this video, I'm going to present a few pronunciation tips, starting from a basic to a more advanced level. First, let's talk about individual sounds. Now, English words are not often pronounced the way they are spelled, which can be problematic for many learners. When you learn a new word, you need to learn how to say it correctly. There is a useful website called ivona.com, where you can enter a word and listen to its pronunciation. Here are some common words which learners often mispronounce. Worked. There are three ways to pronounce the final ed of regular verbs in the past simple. After unvoiced sounds such as k, p, f, and s, the final ed is pronounced like t, as in the word hot. The e remains silent. Here are some examples. Worked, picked, fixed, missed, stopped. After voiced sounds such as v, g, and y, and all vowel sounds, the final ed is pronounced like d, as in the word good. Again, the e is silent. Here are some examples. lived, played, mugged, cried, killed. After D and T, the final ed is pronounced id, as in did. Started, decided, traded, fitted, noted. Debt. In the word debt, the B is silent. We do not say debt. We say debt. Comfortable. The word comfortable has 3 syllables, not 4. The OR is silent. We say comfortable, not comfortable. Comfortable. Clothes. The final sound is a the followed by an S. Clothes. If this is difficult for you, just pronounce it like close, as in close the door. Close. Answer. The W sound is silent. Answer. Do not say answer. Women. The O in women has a different sound than the O in the singular form woman. In women, the O is pronounced I, as in the word win. The E in women is also pronounced like an I. Women. Culture. Questions about your culture are very common in the speaking test. However, you should pronounce the word culture correctly. The first U is pronounced like the U in but, and the last syllable is pronounced ch. Here are some other words ending in TURE, which are commonly used in the IELTS speaking test. Picture, adventure, future, nature. Usually. The first U in usually is pronounced like the word you. The S is pronounced like je in television. Usually. Tough. The word tough is a less common synonym of the adjective difficult. Using a few less common synonyms, as you know by now, can help you get bands 7 to 9. However, make sure to pronounce the word correctly. The OUGH in tough is pronounced uff, like in stuff. Tough. Recipe. If you have to describe a recipe in the speaking test, make sure you pronounce the word recipe correctly. The ending CIPE is pronounced sipi. Recipe. Okay, so let's get a bit more advanced. There is a very common sound in the English language which makes English sound English. It's called the schwa, and it's represented by this symbol. It sounds like this. This is probably the most common sound in English, and it can be spelled in many different ways. Listen to these words. About. Taken. Pencil. Supply. Provide. The sound is made with your mouth slightly open and relaxed, and without moving your tongue. It comes from the throat. The schwa is often found in unstressed suffixes and prefixes. Okay, so now let's get even more advanced. When native speakers speak at a natural speed, the pronunciation of many words changes and the schwa becomes even more common. Listen to this sentence spoken slowly. I went to a town where there were a lot of tourists. Now listen to the same sentence read quickly. I went to a town where there were a lot of tourists. Did you hear the difference? The pronunciation of unstressed words often changes in natural fast speech. These words include to, where, there, I, you, were, from, for, are, and of. In natural fast speech, they all contain the schwa sound. T, w, the, y, w, from, f, I went to a town where there were a lot of tourists. Now listen and repeat these examples, first slowly and then quickly. How are you? How are you? When are they arriving? When are they arriving? Where are you going? Where are you going? I've just got a present from my brother. I've just got a present from my brother. Have you ever been to Italy? Have you ever been to Italy? Do you know where the children are hiding? Do you know where the children are hiding? I'm going to town for an hour or two. I'm going to town for an hour or two. I've just got back from America. I've just got back from America. There are lots of interesting cafes in my town. There are lots of interesting cafes in my town. These are just a few typical pronunciation features of English. There are many others, and if you are interested in improving your pronunciation, there are plenty of courses on the internet, like the BBC's course.